Hello, and welcome back to Veil Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales veiled in noir, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. My name is Ryan. A couple of years before I'm writing this, I was a 30-something wreck of a man who was barely holding himself together. I lived alone in a tiny apartment that always felt like it was shrinking. One bedroom, a sad little living room space, and a bathroom so small it felt like the kind you'd find on an airplane. The floor hadn't been clear in years. There were old takeout bags, fast food wrappers, empty bottles, pizza boxes, and random junk stacked in corners like I was building walls out of my own bad decisions. I worked just enough to keep the lights on. When I wasn't working, I was usually drunk. And I hadn't eaten a vegetable in about 3 years. That part matters, because the first sign something was wrong was also, weirdly, something healthy. One morning I woke up, did what I used to call my weekly bathroom trip, and noticed corn in the toilet. Corn. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember if I had eaten anything that could explain it. But my diet was basically fried food, pizza, microwave junk, and whatever came out of a vending machine. Vegetables were not part of my life. Corn wasn't part of my life. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd seen a corn kernel that wasn't on a menu I ignored. I told myself the simplest thing. I must have eaten it while I was drunk. Maybe I craved corn for some reason. Maybe I ordered something random and forgot. I didn't want to think too hard about my own body or my own habits, so I flushed, washed my hands, and moved on. Except it kept happening. The next week, corn again. Then a few days later, corn again. At first, it was once in a while, enough that I could still pretend it was just my memory failing me. But over time, it became constant. Every couple of days, there it was. Corn like a little yellow reminder that something about my life wasn't adding up. After 2 months of constant corn, I noticed something else. I could see the floor. Not everywhere, but in patches. Clear rectangles of carpet, where there had been piles of trash. Space near the couch I hadn't had to step over. A path to the bathroom that didn't require lifting my feet like I was hiking. I stood in my doorway, staring at it like I'd walked into the wrong apartment. My first thought was still the same excuse. Maybe I'd been cleaning while drunk. It wasn't impossible. Sometimes I'd wake up with a vague memory of being mad at myself and swearing I was going to change. Maybe drunk me had finally done something useful. There was still garbage everywhere, just less of it. Enough less that it was noticeable. The thing is, I didn't question it much, because it wasn't a bad thing. For once, my life was improving without me having to fight myself to do it. I didn't have to wade through piles of wrappers and boxes. I could walk normally. I wasn't going to complain if drunk me had decided to renovate a little. Then it got weirder. I started waking up without hangovers. That sounds like a good thing too, and it was, but it didn't make sense. I was still drinking. I was still going to bed in that familiar heavy fog, the kind where you don't remember falling asleep. And yet I'd wake up and my head wouldn't be pounding. My mouth wouldn't taste like sour metal. My stomach wouldn't feel like a wet rag. I also noticed I was having more bowel movements than usual. That's not a detail I ever expected to put into words, but it was part of the pattern. My body felt regular, like someone had quietly taken control of the basic functions I'd neglected. Then my clothes started showing up clean, folded, not just tossed into a pile, not just moved from one chair to another, actually folded. Shirts stacked, pants creased, socks matched. It would have taken me hours to do that, even sober. I didn't do it sober. And drunk me? Drunk me could barely find the bathroom some nights, let alone fold laundry like a neat freak. One morning I woke up and the floor looked like it had been mopped. Mopped. The smell of cleaning solution was faint but real, like lemon and something sharp. The problem was I didn't own a mop. I didn't even own a bucket. I didn't own any cleaning products besides a half-empty bottle of dish soap and a pack of paper towels. Even then, I didn't fully accept what it meant. My brain fought it. I kept trying to cram reality back into a shape that didn't scare me, until I came home one day and saw my bed was made. Not the blanket pulled up, because it slid that way. Made. Corners tucked, pillow straight, blanket smooth like it had been patted down. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom and felt something cold move through me. I never made my bed. Ever. It wasn't a habit I'd had even when I was a kid, and it wasn't something I'd suddenly start doing now. And drunk me wasn't in my apartment during the day, because drunk me came out at night. There was only one explanation left. Someone else was coming into my apartment. My first thought wasn't even intruder. It was landlord, or a concerned neighbor. Or maybe someone had complained about the smell and management was doing something quietly. I was actually close to believing that, because it was easier. Then I remembered an old friend. About a month before all of this started, a guy from high school had messaged me online. He wanted to say hi, catch up, see how I was doing. I wasn't excited about it. I didn't really want anyone to see my life up close. But he was one of the few people who had ever tried to be my friend back then. I wasn't popular. I wasn't interesting. I mostly kept to myself. He still talked to me anyway, like I mattered. So I replied. He asked if we could hang out, and I said sure, we could talk outside my apartment sometime. I had no intention of letting him inside. I couldn't let him see the mess. I couldn't let him see what I'd become. But he took it further. He actually came over. And when he arrived, my landlord was outside the building for some reason, doing whatever landlords do when they want tenants to remember they exist. My friend introduced himself like it was normal, and because he had no sense of boundaries or personal safety, he asked the landlord for my unit number. And my landlord told him. So a few minutes later, my old friend knocked on my door, and I opened it, and he got a full view of my apartment in all its disgusting glory. Oh, he said, and that one word held shock and pity and the effort to hide both. His eyes flicked over the trash, the smell, the stained carpet, the clutter. How have you been, man? I'm fine, I said, and even I could hear the lie. Do you want to go outside? He didn't argue. We went out to the front of the complex and talked for a while. He asked what I'd been up to, and I gave him the only answer I had. Not much. He accepted it without digging too hard, which I appreciated. Then I asked how he was, and his life sounded like a commercial for adulthood. He'd gotten married. He had a good job. He owned a house. He talked about his life like it was solid, stable, planned. I don't want to pretend I was furious with jealousy, but it made me painfully aware of the gap between us. I always knew my life was awful. I just never had the motivation to change it, and once the garbage piled up, it felt impossible to start. The mess became normal. The misery became normal. Normal is a dangerous thing. At one point, he looked at me and said, very directly, dude, you live in a mess. It stung because it was true, and because he didn't dress it up. You can't keep living like that, he added. It's going to kill you. I don't remember exactly what I said. Something defensive, something like, it's easier said than done. I probably sounded like an asshole. But he didn't get offended. He just sighed like he was disappointed in the situation, not in me. Look, he said, if you ever need it, I can help you clean up your apartment. And maybe the rest of your life, too. Just call me. I'll help. I remember staring at him because I didn't know how to respond to kindness like that anymore. Then he said he had to go, but he repeated it, like he wanted to make sure I heard him. If you need help, don't hesitate. I never called him, but when my apartment started cleaning itself, he was the first person I thought of. It was ridiculous, but it was also the only human explanation I could reach for. Maybe he had talked my landlord into giving him a spare key. Maybe he was sneaking in when I was gone to clean because he felt bad. Maybe he figured I'd be angry if he asked first, so he just did it and hoped I'd be grateful. It sounded insane. Still, I actually practiced what I was going to say before I called him. How do you ask someone, casually, if they've been breaking into your place to fold your laundry and feed you vegetables? Even thinking the sentence made me feel embarrassed. I finally called him and tried to keep it normal. I asked if he wanted to come by sometime, like we were just two old friends catching up. He said he would, but it would be in a couple of months. His schedule was tight. He lived far away. Work kept him moving. That answer didn't fit the idea that he'd been visiting my apartment constantly. So I did the only thing that made sense. I bought a couple of cheap cameras and set them up in my apartment. I told myself it was because I wanted to catch a squatter or a burglar. I told myself it was because I wanted peace of mind. The truth is, I was terrified that I'd find out I was losing my mind, sleepwalking, doing all of this myself and not remembering. The next day, I checked the footage. I wish I never had. A long, spindly creature crawled out of the corner of my living room like it had been hiding inside the shadow itself. It moved across the ceiling like a spider and then down the wall and onto the floor. On the floor, it didn't walk normally. It moved sideways, like a crab, like forward, wasn't the direction its body understood. It looked starved, emaciated, a tall torso that looked almost 5 feet long, with ribs pressing up near the top like they might tear through the skin. Its arms were wrong, too many, too long, bending at angles that made my brain flinch. At least 8 arms, but the number didn't stay steady. In the footage, more limbs seemed to appear and disappear depending on the angle and the light, like the camera couldn't agree on what it was seeing. Its head was narrow and smooth and dome-shaped, with dents where eyes should have been. But no eyes. Just skin, like a face that had never been finished. Watching it on video reminded me of those deep-sea creatures that aren't meant to be seen by human eyes, things that live in pressure and darkness, and when they surface, they look like mistakes, like someone built them without caring if they made sense. The creature started cleaning. It moved through my trash piles and scooped up wrappers and bottles with those long limbs, carrying them out of frame, then returning, over and over, for hours, efficient, quiet, like it was doing a job it had done 1,000 times. Then it came back carrying a container of food and a large glass of what I assumed was water. It moved toward my bed, where I was sprawled out asleep, fully clothed, probably still half drunk from the night before. I watched it reach toward me. The arm bent in a way that made my stomach roll, but it didn't hurt me. It pulled the blanket over my body carefully, leaving only my head exposed, like it was tucking in a child. Then it tilted the glass and poured water into my mouth, not dumping it, pouring it slowly, like it knew how to keep me from choking. Then it fed me. It took pieces of food from the container and put them against my lips. I watched my sleeping self open my mouth like an obedient animal. Strawberries, spinach, cucumber, and corn. Then, when it was done, it backed away and moved into the corner again, melting into the shadows until it disappeared. I sat there, staring at the screen long after the video ended. Logically, I knew what any sane person would do. Pack a bag. Leave. Call the police. Sleep somewhere else. Burn the building down if we're being dramatic. Anything but stay. But I need you to understand where I was in my life. I wasn't living. I was rotting. I went to bed alone in filth, woke up sick, went to a job I didn't care about, came home and drank until I couldn't think. I had nobody. I had no momentum. I felt like the world had already decided I was done. And then, suddenly, my life started improving. My apartment became clean. My body felt better. I started waking up without pain. I started eating actual food. I even started taking care of myself on my own, because once the trash was gone, it felt possible to keep it that way. I bathed more often. I drank less. I cleaned up small messes instead of letting them pile. And this creature, this impossible, horrifying thing, was the reason. It didn't steal. It didn't break things. It didn't hurt me. It tucked me in and fed me vegetables like I was some pathetic pet it had decided to rescue. I'm not proud of what I did next, but it's the truth. I let it happen. After a while, I stopped checking the cameras. I knew what I'd see, and I didn't want to feel that fear every day. I also didn't want to ruin whatever strange miracle had started dragging me out of my life. I didn't care how it was improving things. I just cared that for the first time in years, I wasn't miserable. It got better, even better than clean apartment. Somehow I received an email about a job interview for a position that paid more than anything I'd ever had. I still don't understand how it happened. I don't know how that thing could have sent an email or found my resume or contacted anyone. But the interview was real. The company was real. The offer was real. I got the job. I started being more social. I felt lighter. I started talking to a girl. Not a serious relationship, but something real enough that I could picture a future where I wasn't alone in a dirty apartment. If you had been in my place, starving for any sign that your life could change, you might understand why I didn't run. Then, when everything felt normal again, my old friend finally showed up. I'd forgotten he said he'd come in a couple of months. I'd forgotten completely until there was a knock at my door. I opened it, and there he was, holding a cleaning caddy stuffed with supplies, sponges, multiple sprays for different surfaces, brushes, 2 cans of Febreze, like he was coming to fight a war against my apartment. He stepped inside and froze. My apartment was spotless, so spotless that he almost dropped the caddy before catching it. We sat and talked for hours. I told him about my new job, about how I'd turned things around, about the girl I'd been seeing. He told me about his wife, his work, how he moved around a lot and happened to be in my city when he saw me online. He said when he saw how I'd been living, he couldn't just walk away. He said he'd planned to come back and help me clean, and that's why he brought all the supplies. It should have felt good. It did feel good, in a way. But I also felt a growing tightness in my chest because the creature was still in the back of my mind like a locked door. Eventually, it got late. He told me he lived across the state, and it would be at least a 5-hour drive. I invited him to stay the night. He hesitated, then agreed, saying he'd call his wife and let her know he'd head back the next morning. When he came back from the call, I offered him my bed. He refused. I insisted. I told him it was the least I could do. He tried to argue again, but I pushed it, partly because I wanted to be a good host, and partly because I didn't want him sleeping on the futon where the cameras had a clearer view. Finally, he gave in. He took the bed. I slept on the futon. When I woke up the next morning, and he was gone, I didn't think much of it. He'd said he would leave early. When he didn't respond to my texts saying I enjoyed having him over, I assumed he was driving, or busy, or just tired. Then the police came to my door. Ryan Miller? The officer asked. His voice was polite, but there was suspicion under it. Why, yes, I said. My throat went tight. He looked past me into my apartment. May I come in? You're not in trouble. We just need to speak with you. I let him in. My mind was already sprinting ahead. He explained that my friend was missing. His wife reported him missing after he didn't return home. They found his car parked on the side of the road about 3 hours away from my city. The car was empty, no sign of him. And because I was the last person known to have seen him, they needed to ask questions. They weren't accusing me, the officer said. They didn't believe I'd done anything. But they needed to know if my friend had said anything strange, if he'd complained about his job, if he'd mentioned being unhappy, if he'd seemed suicidal, anything that would explain why a stable married man would vanish. I tried to answer honestly. During the hours we talked, my friend didn't seem depressed. He didn't seem desperate. He had normal complaints about life, traffic, work stress, the usual, but nothing that sounded like a man planning to disappear. No, I finally said, nothing like that. The officer took notes, thanked me, and left. When the door shut behind him, I stood in the middle of my clean apartment and felt like the walls were closing in anyway. It took me 3 hours of pacing and panicking before I remembered the cameras were still running. My hands shook as I pulled up the footage from the night before. I watched it from the beginning, forcing myself not to skip ahead, because I needed to know exactly when it happened. Eventually, the creature slid out of the shadow, except it didn't go toward me this time. It moved straight toward the bedroom. It moved faster than it should have for something that looked so thin and fragile. It didn't clean. It didn't carry water. It didn't bring food. It stopped in the doorway of the bedroom and stared at my sleeping friend. And I don't know how to explain this, because the creature didn't have eyes, but the way it held itself looked like hunger. Something wet dripped from the lower part of its face, like saliva, and it stood there for hours, perfectly still, watching him breathe. It stayed like that until morning. When my friend's alarm went off, the creature disappeared into the shadows instantly, like it could fold itself into darkness. My friend got up quietly and moved through the apartment, careful not to wake me. He grabbed his things and slipped out the door like a considerate guest. Then the creature moved again. I watched it slide out of the corner and go toward the window. The window faced the same side of the building where my friend's car had been parked. I watched the creature leave, not through the door, not like something that belonged in the world. It went out through the window side, moving in a way the camera struggled to capture, like it was more motion than body. The footage after that didn't show what happened outside. It didn't show my friend's car. It didn't show the road. It only showed my apartment, empty and silent, with sunlight slowly creeping across the floor. I sat there staring at the paused screen, and I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. It hadn't been helping me because it was kind. It had been keeping me. It had been feeding me and cleaning around me like you care for livestock, like you keep something alive because you want it healthy, like you want it in good condition for a reason. And the second someone else slept in my bed, the creature looked at him the way a starving person looks at food. I don't know if it killed my friend. I don't know if it ate him. I don't know what it did. But I knew with a certainty that made my hands go cold that I wasn't safe there anymore. I moved fast. I didn't just leave the complex. I left the state. I moved across the country. I didn't even pack properly. I shoved what I could into a briefcase, things that were valuable or annoying to replace, and I left. I didn't tell the police about the creature because nobody would believe me, and even if they did, what were they going to do? Send officers into my apartment to look for a thing that melts into shadows and climbs ceilings? So I disappeared the only way I knew how. Years passed. I got a good job. I rented an even nicer apartment. The girl I'd been talking to didn't understand why I suddenly vanished, and I couldn't explain it without sounding insane, so that ended. But the rest of my life stayed good, and the good habits stuck. I cleaned up messes right away. I stopped drinking. I made sure no garbage piled on the floor. I ate better. I went for daily walks. Part of it was gratitude, like I'd been given a second chance. Part of it was fear, like I was trying to prove I wasn't the kind of person who needed help anymore. For a long time, everything felt normal. Then one day I overslept and rushed out the door, already late for work. I cut corners in my routine. I grabbed my keys and left without doing the small things I usually did. And one of those small things was the bed. I never used to make it, but now I did. It had become part of my new life. That morning, I didn't have time. When I got home that night, exhausted, I walked into my bedroom and stopped so hard it felt like my heart slammed against my ribs. My bed was made. Corners tucked, pillow straight, blanket smoothed down. Neat, like a careful hand had pressed it flat. Neat, like someone wanted me to notice. And in that instant, I understood something that made my stomach go cold. It didn't matter that I had moved across the country. It didn't matter that I had rebuilt my life. It had found me again. Story 2. My job is to clean an office building whose name is only an address. Not a company name on the front. Not a logo. Just numbers on the outside like it's embarrassed to be identified. I'm the only cleaner, and it's a long day. 4 floors. Alone. Every single day. Bathrooms, trash, carpets, glass, break rooms, conference rooms, desks, everything. By the time I'm done, my arms feel like they don't belong to me anymore. Then I do it again the next day, and the day after that. Denver, if it matters, which it doesn't. This place feels like it could be anywhere. That's kind of the problem. I'm expected to make every room spotless, with one exception, a hallway that also doesn't have a name. Everyone calls it the Hall of Doors, and I'm not allowed to enter it. I get reminder texts, too, not weekly, not when I start the job. Daily. The same message every morning, like someone scheduled it from a machine that doesn't understand how unnecessary it is. Do not enter the Hall of Doors. That's it. No explanation. No reason. No safety hazard warning. Just a line that feels less like a policy and more like a rule. To give you an idea what kind of people work in this building, I later learned they call it the Hall of Doors because of some reference to the second Rayman game. I didn't even know what that meant until I looked it up. That's what passes for humor here. They joke like they're trying to prove they're human. By the way, I know almost nothing about what any of these well-dressed office workers actually do. As far as I can tell, they sit at their computers and type like their lives depend on it. Fast. Hard. Like the keyboard is something they're fighting. They do it all day, every day, and when I've asked what they do, they shrug or smile politely or say something like, "You know how it is. I do not know how it is." They have meetings in various conference rooms that I have to clean, but I'm not allowed in while they're happening. I always have to wait until everyone leaves. So whatever they talk about stays sealed behind those doors, and I'm left wiping fingerprints off the glass afterward, like I'm erasing evidence of a ritual. Once, they forgot to clean a whiteboard. I walked into a conference room after a meeting, ready to spray down the table and empty the trash, and there it was, the entire whiteboard, covered top to bottom in the Fibonacci sequence. Just the numbers, written in neat columns that went on and on and on. No diagrams, no notes, No labels, just the sequence, like someone had been copying it with religious focus. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at it, waiting for my brain to connect it to something normal. A finance meeting, a coding session, some weird math joke. Anything. Nothing fit. Eventually, I erased it, because that's what I'm paid to do. I wiped every number away until the board was blank and clean and harmless again. But the act of erasing it left me with a strange feeling, like I had done something I wasn't supposed to, even though the room was on my list and the marker stains were part of my job. Every day when I get to work, I park in a giant empty parking lot. Huge, acres of space, rows and rows, like the building expects crowds that never show up. I've been told there's a subterranean parking garage where all the office workers park. They say it casually, like it's obvious. But I've never seen it. I don't know where the entrance is. I don't have a key card for it. I've asked once or twice, and people just look at me like I'm asking where the sky starts. It irritates me more than it should, because I clean the whole building. I should know where the garage is. If a building has space underneath it, I should have mopped it at least once by now. But when I arrive, all the workers are already inside. Every single day. And they always leave during the same part of the day. The part where I go through and clean the conference rooms. Day in, day out. Like their schedules were designed around mine. I've wanted to change the order I clean things in so many times. Out of boredom, out of misery, out of curiosity. Just to see what happens if I clean the third floor before the second, or if I do the bathrooms last instead of first. Management is strict about the order. And when I say management, I mean that's what everyone calls them. Always. Just management. No names, no titles, no faces, really. In a first for my cleaning career, I technically worked directly for the corporation that owns the building, not for a cleaning service, not through a contractor. The checks come from the building itself, from a corporate payroll system that doesn't include a company name I recognize. The only reason I have this job is because I answered what I thought was a spam text when I was desperate. It offered decent pay, immediate start, no background check beyond the basics. It felt too easy, but I needed the money. The interview didn't clear anything up. A smiling bald man sat across from me in a small office and asked 3 questions. Was I a firstborn? I'm not. Did I own any cats? I don't. Could I work weekends? I said yes, because when you're desperate, you say yes. Now I work 7 days a week. That was the entire interview. No questions about experience. No references. No tell me about yourself. Just those 3 things, like they were checking boxes on a list that wasn't about cleaning. As you can tell, communication isn't exactly their strength. The workers don't know anything beyond their tasks. They don't gossip about projects or deadlines the way normal office people do. They talk about management, and occasionally about the CEO, but even that is strange. Because whenever they need to speak with the CEO, they go into the Hall of Doors. That's the only place they ever mention him. Not a conference room. Not an office with glass walls and a fancy desk. They say things like, I need to run that by the CEO, and then they disappear into that hallway and come back looking relieved, or shaken, or blank. Sometimes they speak English. Sometimes they don't. There are a lot of different accents in this building, a lot of different first languages from all over the world. I don't know where the company is headquartered. I don't know where the CEO is from. It's like the building exists on its own, disconnected from the normal idea of a business. I've never seen any security, either. No guard desk, no visible cameras, no check-in for visitors. That used to strike me as careless. Now it strikes me as confident, like they don't need security, because there's nowhere to go. Anyway, this is the part where I tell you I went into the Hall of Doors. I didn't have a good reason. I knew I could get fired. A part of me hoped I would. Not because I hate cleaning, exactly, but because the routine here feels like a slow suffocation. And another part of me had become obsessed with the CEO, not in a fan way, but in a proof way. I needed to know he was real. Because when people talk about him, they don't talk about him like a boss. They talk about him like a place you go, like a door you use, like a thing you consult. They talk about him with the careful tone people use when they're saying something that might hear them back. I know how that sounds. I'm aware. But after months of working alone in a building where everything is too clean and too quiet and too controlled, you start needing answers just to keep your mind steady. It happened at the end of the day. I had just finished cleaning the last conference room on my list. The building had that late, hollow feeling it gets when the workers have cleared out. The lights were still on, bright and flat, but the air felt emptied. I stood there with my mop and looked down the main hallway. And there it was, the entrance to the Hall of Doors. It wasn't marked, no sign, no authorized personnel only, just a normal hallway opening like any other, except it always seemed a little darker inside, like the light didn't reach as far as it should. I looked both ways. No one around. No footsteps. No voices. Then I walked in. I did it the way you do something you know you're not supposed to do. The way you do it when you want to convince yourself it's normal. I held the mop like I was there for a reason. Like I cleaned this hallway every day. Like if someone saw me, it would look routine. No one notices me anyway. That's the strange truth of being a cleaner. People see you like they see a vending machine or a fire extinguisher. You're part of the building, not part of the day. So I went in. The Hall of Doors looked normal. That's the first thing. It wasn't a haunted corridor. It wasn't dripping. It didn't have weird symbols. It looked like the other hallways. The same carpet, the same walls, the same sterile smell. It even looked cleaner than the rest of the building, which made no sense, because I wasn't supposed to clean it. The baseboards were spotless. There were no scuffs, no dust in corners. The only difference was the doors. There were more of them than there should have been, spaced along both sides. Plain wooden doors with simple handles. No labels. No room numbers. Just doors, one after another, disappearing down the length of the hallway. And there were no televisions in here. In the rest of the building, there are always TVs mounted on walls, always playing the news with subtitles, always chattering in the background. In here, there was none of that. Just the quiet. I started mopping. I wasn't trying to open anything. Not at first. I told myself I would mop the first few feet and then leave, just to say I'd been in there, just to prove to myself it was only a hallway. Then I heard voices approaching from behind me, footsteps coming up fast. Man, can you believe the CEO is coming? Yeah, man, the CEO coming here. Imagine. Panic hit me so fast my stomach clenched. I wasn't supposed to be in there. I didn't know what would happen if they saw me. Fired, sure, but the daily texts felt like more than a work rule. They felt like a warning. I grabbed the nearest door and yanked it open and stepped through without thinking. And I was outside. Bright daylight. Hot air. A busy walkway full of people. The light was so strong, it made my eyes water. The buildings around me were pale stone and clean lines, immaculate architecture. Nothing like Denver. The street signs were in Italian. I turned around, still holding the door. Behind me was the same plain wooden door, sitting in a wall that absolutely did not belong to any office building in Colorado. It looked wrong in that setting, like a piece of furniture dragged into the street. My mouth was dry. My brain tried to form a rational sentence and couldn't. Then, down the walkway, I saw a man in white robes coming around a distant corner. He wasn't alone. There seemed to be several people with him, moving in a tight group like an escort. They weren't rushing, but the way they moved made me think of security or ceremony. I didn't wait to see his face. I stepped backward through the door and slammed it shut behind me, back in the hall of doors. The air inside felt cooler, flatter, like the outside world had been a fever dream, and this was reality. But my hands were shaking, and my mop handle felt slick in my grip. The voices behind me were closer. I grabbed another door, any door. I pulled it open and stepped through again. This time it was night, neon signs everywhere, tall buildings crowded close, Korean writing glowing in bright colors. The air smelled different, like street food and exhaust. The city noises were louder, sharper. I spun in place, heart pounding, and saw the door again behind me. That same plain wooden door wedged into a world it didn't belong in. I didn't stay. Back through it. Back into the hallway. At that point, the Hall of Doors stopped feeling like a joke reference. It stopped feeling like a weird office quirk. It became something else entirely. Something that made the skin on my arms tighten and my teeth feel too close together. I should have run. I should have gotten out immediately. Instead, I did the strangest thing. I kept mopping, not because I thought it mattered, because I needed to look normal, because my brain decided that acting like it was ordinary was the only way to survive it. I mopped the carpet like you can mop carpet, dragging the damp strands across it more than cleaning, and I slowly worked my way back toward the part of the building I was allowed to be in. Right past the two office workers who had been walking up. I expected them to stop, to stare, to ask why I was there, to ask why I looked like I had seen something impossible. They didn't. They walked past me like I was a plant. And that's when she made that crazy face and ran off. One of them said, laughing, I would too. The other replied. They kept going. Their voices faded down the hall. If either of them noticed me, they gave no sign. Like always, like I wasn't there at all. Nobody ever said anything to me about it afterward. Nobody texted me an angry warning. Nobody called me into an office. Nobody fired me. I still have the job. I still clean the building every day. And I work harder than I ever have to never think about that hallway. I tell myself it was a stress dream, that I was tired, that my brain filled in nonsense, that I stepped into a supply closet and had a moment of dissociation and imagined the rest. Because if it was real, then the world stops making sense. If it was real, then those doors go somewhere, and the CEO is not just a person in an office. If it was real, then I'm mopping floors in a building that has a hallway full of exits to other places, and the people who work here treat that like it's normal. So here I am, cleaning, day in, day out. And every morning when my phone buzzes with that same reminder not to enter the Hall of Doors, I feel my stomach tighten. Because now I understand what the message really is. It's not there to stop me from breaking a rule. It's there to remind me that I already did. Story 3. My grandfather died, but nobody seemed to notice. Not even him. I've been holding this in for 2 years because I don't know how to explain it without sounding like I'm confusing timelines, or turning grief into a story, or taking one of those half-formed memories and building something dramatic around it. But I'm not. I remember it too clearly. It sits in my head like a physical object, heavy and sharp, and no matter how many times I try to sand it down into something more reasonable, it won't change shape. He died in November 2024. I remember the cold more than anything. Not just the weather, but the way the whole month felt cold. like the air had weight. He had been sick for a while. Nobody was pretending he wasn't. There were appointments and medication changes and long stretches where he didn't have energy for more than sitting in his chair and watching TV at a low volume. It wasn't sudden in the way accidents are sudden. It was the kind of sudden where you know it's coming and then it still shocks you when it arrives. One day he was there, tired and thin but still himself. The next day he was gone. And my family did what families do when someone dies. Everything turned into a list of tasks, phone calls, arrangements, people showing up with casseroles and deli trays and desserts nobody really ate. That weird, polite sadness that fills a house when everyone is trying to act normal while something huge has happened. We had a wake. I remember the smell of the funeral home more than the room itself. That mix of flowers and carpet and something chemical that never fully goes away. I remember the lighting, too bright and too soft at the same time, designed to make everything look gentle. I remember relatives I barely knew hugging me and saying, "He's in a better place," like they were reading from a script. And we had a funeral. I remember standing there and thinking it didn't feel real, but not in a supernatural way. In the normal way people say that after someone dies, when your brain refuses to accept the finality of it. I remember seeing him in the casket. His face looked wrong, not like he was sleeping, like people like to say. It looked like a version of him that had been made to look like him. Too still, too quiet. Then I watched them lower the casket into the ground. I watched the straps tighten. I watched the box disappear into the hole. I remember my stomach turning as the last bit of it vanished, like my body understood what my mind still couldn't. And I remember the sound of dirt hitting the coffin. That's the part that refuses to leave me. It's such a specific sound. A dull, heavy thud, not dramatic, not cinematic, just final. Dirt landing on wood, over and over, like punctuation, like the earth closing a door. After that, life went the way you'd expect. In that slow, uneven way grief works when you're not falling apart, but you're also not okay. His chair stayed empty. His name came up in the past tense. Holidays felt slightly wrong, like a song played in the wrong key. There were moments where I'd almost forget, where I'd walk into my grandparents' house and expect to hear his voice from the kitchen, or see him in the living room. Then I'd remember, and the absence would hit me again. It wasn't constant crying. It wasn't dramatic scenes. It was that steady, low-level awareness that something had been removed from the world, and the world had kept going anyway. Then, exactly a year later, everything broke. In November 2025, my mom told me we were going over to my grandparents' house to do something small for the anniversary. Nothing big, she said. Just dinner, just being together. I wasn't expecting anything emotional. If anything, I expected awkwardness. The kind of dinner where people avoid saying the dead person's name too much, and if they do say it, they do it carefully, like handling glass. When I walked in, he was there. Not in a way that made everyone scream, not in a way that stopped the world. He was just in the kitchen, moving around like he always had, reaching into cabinets, setting things on the counter, doing small tasks like he'd been doing them every day of his life. And nobody reacted. Nobody even hesitated. That's what hit me first, harder than seeing him. The normalness of it. The way the room forced itself into being ordinary, like whatever I thought I knew was the mistake. I stood in the doorway too long, I think, because my mom touched my arm and said something like, "You okay?" In the casual tone people use when they think you're tired or distracted. I looked from her to him and back again, waiting for someone to acknowledge the obvious, waiting for someone to make a joke, waiting for anything that would explain why my grandfather was standing in a kitchen when I had watched him get buried the year before. Nothing happened. He looked up briefly, nodded at me, and said something normal, like hey or good to see you, the way he always did. Then he went back to what he was doing. My brain tried to catch up. It did that thing where it searches for a rational explanation so fast it almost hurts. Maybe I was remembering the year wrong. Maybe the funeral had been for someone else, and I'd mixed it up. Maybe my grandfather had been sick but hadn't died, and my memory had turned we thought we were losing him into we lost him. But there were too many details that didn't feel flexible. We sat down and ate. We talked about ordinary things. Work. Weather. Someone's car trouble. A neighbor who'd planted something weird in their yard. It all felt strangely contained, like everyone knew where the edges were and made sure the conversation stayed inside them. The whole time, my grandfather acted like nothing unusual had happened. He wasn't confused. He wasn't fragile. He wasn't asking why people were acting weird. He was just there, like he had always been there. I tried to bring up last November once, not dramatically. I didn't say you were dead. I didn't accuse anyone of lying. I just tried to step toward it, carefully, like testing ice. I mentioned the anniversary. I mentioned how hard last year had been. The response was immediate, and it wasn't loud. It was firm. My mom cut in with a quick, flat change of subject. My grandmother's face tightened, and she started talking about the food like she hadn't heard me. My grandfather didn't react at all. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask what I meant. He just kept eating. It felt like I had broken a rule I didn't know existed. After that, I stopped trying so directly, at least in that moment. I told myself I'd bring it up later, privately, when there weren't so many people around to shut it down. But later never came, because the same thing happened every time I tried. Over the next few weeks, it became clear this wasn't a one-night glitch or some strange misunderstanding. He was just back, existing in the same spaces, doing the same routines, sitting in his chair, watching his shows, making coffee the way he always had, complaining about little things like he always had. If you didn't know he had died, nothing would seem off. That became its own kind of horror. The world had smoothed itself over like a wrinkle had been ironed out, and the only person who still felt the shape of the wrinkle was me. What's worse is that no one in my family would talk about November 2024. Not in any context. Not even in the vague way families talk about that hard time. If conversation drifted anywhere near it, it changed direction fast. If I pushed, people didn't look confused. They looked tense, upset, like I was being cruel. And it wasn't just that they didn't want to relive grief. It felt like avoidance with a purpose, like everyone had silently agreed to treat that month as if it didn't exist, like the month itself was dangerous. My grandfather, for his part, didn't seem to remember being sick, at least not in a way that matched what I remembered. He'd mention minor health issues like any older person might, but nothing about being on the edge of death. Nothing about hospital visits. Nothing about people saying goodbye. If I tried to bring up how worried we were, he'd look at me like I was exaggerating, or he'd laugh it off. As far as he was concerned, there was no missing time. And yet there are small things that don't line up. Not obvious things, not the kind of clues you'd see in a movie, just details that feel slightly wrong if you pay attention. He tells certain stories like he's repeating them from memory, but the timing is off. The details land in the wrong order. It's like he knows the shape of the story, but not the exact version he used to tell. Sometimes he'll use a phrase he never used before, a word choice that sounds like it came from someone else's mouth. Sometimes he'll pause in the middle of a routine, like making coffee, as if he's waiting for an instruction he can't quite hear. And sometimes I catch people watching him when they think no one is paying attention. My mom, my grandmother, even other relatives. Their faces look careful, not loving exactly, not suspicious exactly, just careful, like they're monitoring something that could change if they relax. The longer it went on, the more I tried to talk myself out of it. Grief can do weird things. Trauma can scramble memory. People confuse dates. People misremember sequences. People swear they saw something one way and later realize it was another way. I've tried to convince myself that's what happened to me, that my brain took the fear of losing him and turned it into a false memory of actually losing him. That maybe I attended a funeral for someone else and my mind stamped his face onto it because I was already braced for him to go. But I can't get past the sound of dirt hitting the coffin. That sound doesn't feel like something my brain invented. It's too plain, too physical, too specific. And now every November, the same feeling comes back. And it isn't sadness exactly. It's pressure, like something is being held in place with both hands, and if anyone acknowledges it directly, it might come apart. Like the world is balancing on a secret agreement, and I'm the only one who didn't sign it. That's what scares me most. Not the idea that I'm wrong, not even the idea that something impossible happened. It's the idea that everyone else knows exactly what happened, and they're choosing silence anyway. 2 years later, no one in my family will talk about that month. Not even now, when enough time has passed that you'd think they could say his name without flinching. Everything is just as it was. He is alive, eating dinner at the table, watching TV, taking up space in the world like he never left. And I'm stuck holding the memory of a funeral that apparently never happened, wondering how far a mind can bend before it breaks, and whether brains can really invent an entire year by themselves. Because if they can, that means I can't trust anything I remember. And if they can't, that means something else is living in my grandfather's place, and everyone in my family is pretending not to notice. Story 4. It could have been worse. That's what I told myself any time something tested my patience. It was always true, which looking back says a lot about the kind of choices I made to end up in that van in the first place. Sure, the chains rubbed my ankles raw, but skin heals. Sure, dread had tied my stomach into so many knots I felt like my intestines could be used as a fishing net. But that feeling wouldn't last forever. It surged every time the van hit another rut, though, and there was no way we were on a paved road. We bounced and swayed like we were being dragged across the spine of the earth. Fine. I could handle it. It wasn't my first time tied up in a suspicious van headed to a place no one wanted to name out loud. No, the real problem, the thing that brought me right to the edge of losing my mind, was the morning breath of the squinty-eyed bastard chained to the seat across from me. I actually tried to be polite about it. The first time his breath hit me, I leaned toward the guard, quiet, respectful, and asked if I could get a mint. Not for me, for him. I was trying to do everyone a favor. The guard smacked his gum and slammed the van door hard enough to rattle the metal. Then, Squinty took offense to my attempt at basic hygiene. He flexed a meaty arm as much as his chains allowed, jabbed a finger at me, and made it very clear that the teeth in my jaw were a privilege, not a right. He didn't say it in those exact words, but the meaning was the same. His breath hit me again in a fresh wave, and I learned a new kind of suffering. As threats go, it wasn't impressive. For starters, there was no way he could reach me across the van, and I wasn't worried he'd somehow slip his restraints. That beady-eyed stare had the intelligence of a man who'd scooped out his brain and replaced it with rehydrated astronaut food. Still, I decided to be the bigger person and not start a fight with my coworker on our first day of work. I wish I'd had that level of restraint earlier in my life. If I had, I might not have been in this van at all. The thought dragged my mind back to the contract, back to the lawyer with the smooth voice and the third-party smile. He'd sat me down in a sterile room, across a table bolted to the floor, and slid a thick contract toward me like he was offering a menu. He kept the job description simple, annoyingly simple, vague on purpose. According to him, some philanthropic corporate giant had decided to give local prison inmates a chance at honest work. The pay was fair. The conditions were humane. They promised, practically, Pinky swore, and he expected me to act grateful. I told him as politely as I could manage that he could shove his bright red flags up his ass and leave me to the humane conditions of my cell. Then he offered me something that didn't sound like freedom, but smelled close enough to make my instincts wobble. A different cell. A room even on company grounds. No unwanted roommates. Maybe supervised trips into town once in a while. Not release, not a pardon, not a clean slate. Just space. Quiet. Something that felt like the edges of a life. I meant to spit in his face. Instead, my hand found the pen. That was the moment I became the kind of person who ended up chained in a van next to Squinty. The van stopped so abruptly it snapped me out of my memory like a rubber band. For a second, my stomach floated, then dropped. I heard the front doors open and close. 2 sets of boots crunched gravel. They circled around to the back. The doors swung open in a flood of sunlight and the sweet shock of fresh air. I sucked it in so greedily it almost hurt. One guard stood back with his hand on his weapon, like he was expecting us to grow claws. The other climbed in to unlock us from the van. It wasn't lost on me that he'd clearly replaced his gum. Fresh, minty scent, clean and sharp. So he could do that when it benefited him. The bastard just didn't care when it benefited me. He directed Squinty out first, then turned to me. I stepped down carefully, then stomped a little to get feeling back into my legs. Pins and needles raced up my calves. My ankles screamed as the cuffs bit into the raw spots again, and I regretted moving at all. Squinty didn't bother with any of that. He puffed himself up like a bull, stared down the guards, and tried to radiate intimidation. I rolled my eyes. He was shaped like an inverted tree, shoulders like boulders balanced on branched legs that looked like a stiff wind could knock him over. But his ego was the sturdiest part of him. The gum chewing guard tugged on our shared lead and started us down a narrow trail swallowed by forest overgrowth. His partner followed behind with his hand still resting on his weapon. Between the sun beating down and the lovely company, I wondered again why I'd agreed to this. I didn't even know what this was. I should have read the contract properly. I should have asked questions. I should have done anything besides sign. The deeper we walked, the more the air changed. It wasn't just the smell of soil and leaves. There was something else underneath. Faint, but persistent. Like the forest was trying to cover up a wound. My paranoia dug in as the walk dragged on. For all I knew, this was an execution. Bring the prisoners out where no one would see. Oops, they tried to run. 6 bullets to the chest. Paperwork. Done. Plenty more bodies in the system. Before that thought could fully take over, the trees opened into a clearing, and my feet slowed on their own. There was a gash in the ground at the center. Not a hole, not a cave entrance in the normal sense. A gash. Like the earth had split open and never healed. Trees leaned away from it, trunks angled outward as if the entire forest had learned to give this place distance. Even the grass around it looked thinner, reluctant. The gum guard pulled the chain and dragged us closer to the spot everything else avoided. Each step revealed more of what waited below. A tunnel sloped downward past where sunlight reached. The darkness inside didn't look like simple shadow. It looked thick, like something you could fall into and never climb out of. A woman stood in the mouth of the tunnel. She had bright blonde hair that caught the sun and made a halo around her head. Her face looked friendly, in a clean, practiced way. She wore a taser on her belt and carried herself like someone who didn't need to prove anything. She looked strong enough to bench press me, and the confident calm in her eyes told me she absolutely would if I gave her a reason. She nodded at the guards as we approached. They didn't nod back. The gum guard checked his watch, popped a bubble, and jerked his chin toward his partner. They positioned themselves on either side of us and nudged Squinty and me forward like livestock. The woman smiled at us. "I'm the zookeeper," she said. "Your jobs are to assist me with the animals." I opened my mouth to make a joke, something about Squinty being the animal and her being his caretaker, but the smile stopped me. It did everything a smile is supposed to do. It lifted her mouth, crinkled her eyes, softened her face, and still, the knots in my stomach tightened. The zookeeper turned without explaining anything else, and the darkness swallowed her from the waist down, then the shoulders, then the glowing hair, until she was gone. The last thing I wanted was to follow her into another tight space. My brain shoved a desperate idea forward. Run, bolt into the trees, force the guards to chase me, anything but go underground. But I knew the truth. The end of this day was either the cave or the van. And at least in the cave, I wasn't trapped next to Squinty. Sandwiched between the guards and his breath, I followed down. The air changed immediately. A chill climbed up my legs as Shadow grabbed my ankles, then my waist, then my throat. I'd never been so aware of the sun's touch until the moment it let go of my head and I realized I was fully inside the earth. The zookeeper's flashlight lit the path ahead. The guards added their own beams, one in front, one behind, boxing us in with pale cones of light. I still don't know how she navigated that maze. The cave branched and twisted until my sense of direction collapsed. Left, right, down, narrow, wider, then narrow again. It felt endless. The ceiling dropped in places so low I had to hunch, and sometimes the passage got so tight I had to turn sideways to squeeze through. Those parts were the worst. Stone pressed close on both sides, cold enough to leach warmth through clothes. The chill didn't soothe my raw ankles. It only made the metal cuffs feel sharper, like the cold had teeth. I distracted myself with Squinty's misery. His bulk made the tight spaces harder. More than once, he had to stop and force the air out of his lungs to squeeze through. The guard in front yanked on his chain when he took too long. The metal clank echoed, unnaturally loud, like a gunshot. Something prickled along my spine. Not just claustrophobia, something else. I thought about how the cave mouth had looked, like a wound in the earth, a hidden pocket realm beneath daylight, with its own rules and its own hunger. The perfect cage for an animal no one wanted above ground. The perfect place to dispose of anything that didn't fit in the world. The pressure eased when a stronger glow appeared ahead. Lantern light. The zookeeper turned off her flashlight and led us into a wider cavern decorated with hanging lamps. Warm light painted the walls gold, and I felt a wave of relief just from having room to stretch my shoulders. There was furniture, tables, a chair, the kind of staging you'd expect in a work area. Then I noticed the wall decor. On the left wall hung a row of bright orange jackets. On the right wall were fur coats, dark and heavy, hung in a line. It looked like a coat rack designed by someone who didn't believe in comfort. The zookeeper turned around, tapped her flashlight against her palm, and nodded at the guards again. They ignored her. The gum guard hooked our chain to a clamp on the wall. His partner stood near the cavern entrance with one eye on his watch. Making a hurry-up gesture like this was an annoying errand. Neither guard lingered. Their beams bobbed and faded as they left, and their footsteps disappeared into the tunnels. The zookeeper waited, until the last sound died before she smiled and placed a key on the edge of a table near the orange jackets. Then she stepped back, facing Squinty and me like a teacher about to give instructions. "Unlock your chains," she said, and put on a jacket. "It's cold further in." The release was so unexpected, it took my brain a second to catch up. Squinty lunged forward instantly, yanked back by the clamp and by me. I caught my balance and made a show of loosening the clamp so we could reach the table. Squinty grabbed the key first, of course. I leaned against the table and watched him with one eye and watched the zookeeper with the other. She had crossed to the far side of the cavern, but didn't turn her back on us. She pulled on one of the fur coats and a matching hat, moving like she'd done it 1,000 times. Something about the fur bothered me. Not because it was fur, because it wasn't the fancy kind. It was coarse, matted, uneven. It looked wrong, like it had been taken in a hurry from something that hadn't wanted to give it up. Squinty finally finished unlocking his chains and let them drop with a clatter that echoed off the stone. He cracked his neck and ignored me completely, focusing on the zookeeper like she was his next problem to solve. I snatched the key the second he set it down and started unlocking my cuffs fast, fingers clumsy with cold and nerves. Squinty lumbered over to the zookeeper, puffed up again. She didn't flinch. She only tilted her head enough to meet his eyes. The way she looked at him made my stomach tighten in new ways, like she was looking at an animal deciding whether it was worth feeding. Squinty leaned close, breath curling into the cold air. "The guards have to come back," he said. "Too bad for them. I'll have a hostage." I turned the key, trying to hide the click under his voice. I kept my movements small, quiet, invisible. The last thing I wanted was his attention swinging to me. The zookeeper smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it. "My job isn't hard," she said. "They don't need me when anyone can feed the animals." The sentence landed like a stone. For a moment, Squinty's confidence faltered. He hadn't expected her to say it like that, like it was obvious, like it was already decided. He backed away slowly, still watching her belt where the taser hung. She didn't reach for the taser. She didn't need to. I let my chains drop finally and pulled on one of the puffy orange jackets, the kind that looks like survival gear. Squinty shuffled back toward the jackets, and the zookeeper turned and motioned for us to follow her deeper into the cave. The next passage had lanterns along the walls. Yellow light, the illusion of warmth. It helped for a few minutes. Then the light changed. It turned pale and sickly, like light filtered through bone. We rounded a corner and I stopped without meaning to. The wall ahead was coated in ice that glowed softly, as if it had its own inner light. Ice isn't supposed to glow. The zookeeper glanced back at me and told me to keep moving. In the new light, her face looked gray and sharp, less human. I trudged forward, trying not to touch the glowing ice. It wasn't just on the walls. It spread over the ceiling in patches and pooled on the floor like frozen spit. Clear and thick. Too clear. Like the cave had drooled, and the drool had solidified. The passage opened into a larger cavern. We stepped out onto a ledge that ran around the rim in a ramp, spiraling down toward the center. The drop beside the ramp was nasty, high enough to break something important, low enough to keep you alive long enough to regret it. The zookeeper pointed to a set of metal hooks on the wall. "Hang up your jackets," I thought I'd misheard. I looked at Squinty. His face mirrored my shock. I stammered, "You want us to? Take them off?" "Your warmth is bait," she said, like she was explaining something simple. "It's no good trapped inside your jacket." Squinty's pride flared again. He turned away like he was going to obey, then whipped back around and swung. The zookeeper leaned back just enough for his fist to miss. A few strands of her hair trailed his knuckles. His momentum carried him off balance. She moved fast. One kick to his knee. One hand seized his arm. She twisted it behind his back with clean, practiced force. Squinty yelped. "Will you behave?" she asked calmly, like she was asking if he wanted water. "Fuck you." There was a snap. Squinty staggered away with one arm hanging wrong. He tried again anyway, desperate and stupid. She stepped to the side, spun him, pressed his head into the wall above the hooks, and slammed him hard enough that the sound echoed. When his screaming dropped into a ragged whimper, she leaned close. "I'll only ask one more time," she said. "Will you behave?" For a moment I thought he would refuse and die, just to protect his ego. Then he mumbled yes. She released him. That was it, like it hadn't cost her anything. She turned and looked at me. I didn't wait. I shrugged off the jacket and hung it on an empty hook. Squinty, no longer squinting at all, dragged himself over and hung his jacket on a hook stained dark red. Only then did I notice what was on the wall around some of the hooks. Skin, thin and pale, hanging in strips like someone had peeled a label off an animal and nailed it there as a warning, like a plaque in a zoo. The zookeeper pointed down the ramp. "Go to the center. There are 2 circles drawn on the floor. Each of you stand in one. Wait." We shuffled down. The middle of the ramp was scraped clean of ice, but the edges still glowed. The ice drooled down from icicles overhead and pooled at the bottom of the cavern, where 2 circular patches of bare stone had been carved out like islands. I stepped into the farther circle, as if 6 extra feet could save me. Squinty stepped into the other, shoulders slumped, eyes down like a kicked dog. I hated the flicker of sympathy I felt. I forced it down. If he had the chance, he'd sell me for a warmer jacket without blinking. The cavern looked worse from below. Icicles above looked like teeth. The walls were uneven and lumpy. Several tunnels opened at odd angles like throats waiting to swallow. The largest tunnel opened directly under the ledge we'd entered from, and far above I could see our orange jackets hanging like bright flags in the distance. Mist curled from the mouth of that main tunnel and fizzled out, drifting around the zookeeper's boots as she walked into it. "This is your one and only job today," she said, voice carrying. "Stay in the circle until I say otherwise." I couldn't stop myself. "What does that mean?" she sighed, like I was wasting her time. "It means don't move. You can cover your mouth or look away if it makes you feel better. It's best to keep your breath's heat to yourself." The instructions sounded insane. Stay in the circle so an animal could feed on heat, but don't breathe on it. Then the zookeeper disappeared into the tunnel again, swallowed by mist and darkness, and the cold seemed to deepen in her absence. A metallic crash echoed from deeper inside. It made me flinch so hard my shoulders hurt. Squinty shifted too, eyes flicking from the tunnel to the jackets far above, like he was calculating a run. I followed his gaze. The jackets hung there, unreachable and mocking. I could have tried. I could have sprinted. But leaving the circle felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Like the moment my foot crossed the border, the cave would know. Like the circles weren't just markings. They were rules. Then softer clanks came from the tunnel. A sound I recognized immediately. Chains. Mist rolled out as something massive trudged forward. At first I thought it was the zookeeper dragging equipment. Then the shape grew beyond any human size. Its silhouette resembled a bison, huge head, shaggy outline, horns on either side. Its limbs were thick and wrong, arms hanging too low, shoulders too wide. Hooves clacked on ice as it stepped into the cavern. The smell hit me so hard I gagged. Rotting meat, wet fur, old blood. It made me miss Squinty's breath. I looked away and retched. eyes watering. Even through blurred tears, I saw patches of its skin hanging loose, sloughed off in matted sheets. Chains cut into its body with every step, pulling at raw flesh. Above its hooves, red buds of torn skin swelled where the metal rubbed. It moaned, low and long, and my breath caught. The sound almost had shape to it, like it was trying to become words. I squeezed my eyes shut like a child. The chains rattled violently as the creature lunged toward my circle, yanking against the end of its lead. It snapped its jaws. Flecks of cold saliva hit my cheek. Its breath was awful, but somehow not warm, like it didn't breathe like a living thing. It bellowed again, stamped the ice, and then turned away from me toward the only other heat source in the room, toward Squinty. I opened my eyes just enough to see. The creature drew closer, and Squinty hesitated. He would have stayed put if it had remained only an animal. But then it spoke. Cold, it rasped. Cold. That was the moment the uncanny broke him. Squinty turned to run. His foot slid on the ice. He fell hard, and his heels skidded right into the creature's reach. It grabbed his ankle with long, heavy hands and dragged him back like he weighed nothing. He screamed. The creature didn't react like it cared. It wrapped him in an embrace that looked almost gentle, and then it squeezed. Squinty's eyes locked on mine as the pressure tightened. His face turned red. His eyes bulged. His legs kicked once, twice, then slowed. A loud crack echoed. Then his body went still. The creature looked at me. I hadn't looked into its eyes before. They were cloudy, like the mist had condensed behind them. The haze in them seemed to drain as Squinty cooled, and the creature's posture changed. It stood taller, stronger, like it was drinking heat through bone. Cracks spidered along its chains. Not full breaks, just stress lines like tiny grins that threatened to widen. The creature's lips twitched into something that almost resembled a human smile. It stepped up to the edge of my circle, 6 feet to my left, directly between me and the ramp. Move or die. So I moved, not toward the ramp, toward one of the smaller tunnels behind me. I didn't think, I just ran. For a terrifying moment, I felt claws scrape my ankle. I lost balance, skidded on ice, and threw myself into the tunnel, praying it wasn't a dead end. I kept running until the passage narrowed too small for the creature's bulk. Its roars shook the stone. The sound echoed in weird angles, bouncing around until I couldn't tell where it was anymore. My feet were numb. My lungs burned. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass made of cold. I ran until my body refused. I collapsed onto the stone floor and felt it steal the last of my warmth. I felt feverish, hot inside, frozen outside. My lungs didn't feel hot or cold. They just hurt. I saw scratches on my leg where it had grazed me. I touched my own face and barely felt my fingers. I pinched my nose just to confirm it was still there. The pressure was dull and distant. I wished it hurt more. Pain would have meant I was still fully in my body. What was this place? From the moment we entered, everything had been wrong. The glowing ice, the maze, the animal that spoke. I curled into a ball and breathed into my hands. It didn't help. The smart choice might have been to retrace my steps, but the thought of going back toward the creature made bile rise in my throat. Still, sitting there wasn't survival. I forced myself upright, legs trembling like I was learning to walk again. The tunnel branched a few times. I tried to find airflow by licking a finger and holding it up, but all I felt was cold from every direction. Sometimes the ground angled upward slightly, and my heart jumped like a few inches of incline could erase the weight of the world above. Eventually, the glowing ice patches began to shrink. Then, ahead, I saw a warm yellow glow like the first flower in winter. I nearly cried. The tunnel widened into a room filled with fur coats, dozens of them. Racks and racks of matted fur hung in heavy rows. I stumbled to the closest and shoved my arms into it without thinking. Warmth wrapped around me immediately. Real warmth. My body heat stayed trapped under the fur like the coat was built to hold it. My fingers began to sting as blood returned, and I welcomed the pain like a friend. I paced until my shivering slowed, then finally looked around. A table sat against one wall, cluttered with tools. A battery-powered lamp rested among them. I reached for it and jerked my hand back when the frozen metal burned my palm. I grabbed it again, using my sleeve as a barrier, and slipped my hand through the handle like a bracelet. Then I picked up one of the sharper tools, a skinning knife. There were rust-colored stains on the blade that didn't look like rust. My gaze drifted back to the coats. Some looked wrong, flat where coats should be thick, lumpy where they should be even. I stepped closer, one rack at a time, and the smell grew stronger. The coats near the entrance seemed like coats. Further down, they weren't coats at all. They were sheets of fur. And I understood, suddenly, what kind of place this was, and what kind of animals the zookeeper was taking care of. There was only one other exit from that room. I didn't want to go back the way I came. I couldn't. So I took the other tunnel. The smell followed me, and I hated myself for needing the coat anyway. I pressed my face into the sleeve and inhaled by accident. It smelled like the creature's breath. I gagged. I almost threw the coat off, but then the cold touched my skin through the fabric, and I kept it on. I wanted to feel my nose more than I wanted dignity. This tunnel didn't branch. It ran straight, which should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like the cave was guiding me, like it was making the choice for me. As I walked, fog began to gather. Thick, heavy fog that swallowed my lamp's light. It wasn't normal condensation. It felt alive, pressing against my face, crowding my lungs. I wanted to turn back. I couldn't. My mind felt slow, heavy, like the fog wasn't just in the air, but inside my skull. I kept moving forward because it was the only action left. At some point, the lamp died. I didn't even notice right away. The light faded, and I kept walking, hand against the wall, fingers numb. I dropped the knife somewhere, heard it clatter and vanish into darkness, and didn't stop to retrieve it. Fear had turned into something duller than fear. Exhaustion. Submission. A numbness that made everything feel inevitable. When the fog finally began to thin, I didn't feel relief. I felt nothing. My hands looked hazy, like I was rendering back into existence. The only light ahead was that same sick, pale glow. Then I stepped out of the fog and onto the familiar ice again. I'd come out of the same tunnel I'd watched the creature emerge from earlier. The same cavern. The same cold shoreline. There was no sign of the monster, but the remains of Squinty were there, dark and broken against the ice. His chains lay snapped and twisted nearby. I moved past him without stopping. I reached the ramp and started climbing slowly because my legs barely worked. Shuffle, breathe, don't slip, don't think. Halfway up, I heard footsteps above me. I froze. The sound overlapped my own, too heavy, too deliberate. I looked up toward the ledge where my orange jacket still hung like a promise and saw a shaggy silhouette stepping out of a tunnel near the hooks. For a second, I thought it was the zookeeper. It should have been the zookeeper. But it stood too tall, with arms that hung too low. It sniffed the air like it was searching for a scent, then found me and turned its head. Its lips twitched into that awful, almost human smile, and it opened its arms wide like it wanted a hug. It came for me. I turned to run, and slipped. The ceiling and floor spun, ice flashing past my eyes, and I heard the creature scream. Then, something grabbed my arm and yanked me back so hard my shoulders screamed. I hit the ground. No, that wasn't right. The monster hit the ground. I landed on top of it. It had thrown itself between me and the other creature. For a second, my brain couldn't understand what I was seeing. The creature beneath me groaned and sat up carefully, lifting me with it like I weighed nothing. I expected it to crush me. It didn't. If anything, I felt warmth pouring off it, and something inside me responded to it like thirst. I know how insane that sounds, but that's what it felt like. Like heat was currency down here, and it was offering me some. That should have horrified me. Instead, for a moment it almost felt kind. That was the part that felt most wrong. I tore myself free by slipping out of the fur coat. The creature clutched the coat like it mattered more than I did. It looked at me, then at the coat, then back at me, and let out a sound I can only describe as grief turning into rage. It bellowed so hard the sound vibrated in my bones. Pain exploded through my chest, white hot, like the noise had teeth. The shock snapped me back into motion. Chains whipped out of the darkness. Not the creature's chains, new ones, fast as snakes. One looped around its neck, others wrapped around limbs. It struggled, roaring, trying to pull free. I reached out without thinking. I don't know why. Nothing made sense, but I saw the fire in its eyes and I didn't want it to go out. The creature reached back. It strained, and our fingers almost touched. Then the chains yanked it backward into the dark. My hand closed on empty air. As it was dragged away, it made sounds that mimicked human speech, broken and desperate. Thesis. It screamed. Then it was gone. Footsteps approached, calm and steady. A shaggy silhouette emerged from the dark and sharpened into a person as it came closer. The zookeeper. She looked the same as before, except now she carried a new slab of matted fur over her shoulder like a hunter bringing in supplies. She glanced at me and flicked her wrist for me to follow as she started up the ramp. I was slow, shaking, half numb. To my surprise, she took my orange jacket down from the hook and helped me into it. Her hands were firm and efficient, like she was dressing a worker, not rescuing a human being. I tried to speak, but my mouth couldn't shape words yet. She saw my expression and shrugged. "You survived," she said. "So you're worth something. Come on, let's get out of here." She led me back through the maze. The ice vanished as we moved into warmer tunnels. My breath stopped showing. We reached the cavern with the tables where I'd unlocked my chains earlier. She hung her fur coat back on the rack like nothing had happened. She told me to leave the orange jacket behind. I hesitated, then obeyed. She didn't tell me to put the cuffs back on. She didn't even look at the discarded chains. She only motioned for me to keep walking. I realized with a strange, numb clarity that the restraints hadn't been the point. The cave itself was the restraint. As we walked, the creature's face wouldn't leave my mind. I felt like if I didn't ask now, I would forget everything the moment daylight touched me. Like the cave would drain the memory out of me the way it drained heat from bodies. So I forced the words out. "What did it mean?" I rasped. "Thesis." The zookeeper didn't even slow down. "You mean Theseus," she said. I stumbled a little, trying to keep up. "Theseus." She glanced back at me, and for a moment her eyes softened in a way that made her look more human than I'd seen all day. "We used to have two," she said. "This one called the other Theseus." Then the softness faded. It's best not to use their names. Don't get attached to the animals. We climbed out of the gash in the earth and into sunlight that looked too clean to be real. The sun sat low above the treetops, near the horizon. Late afternoon, or maybe morning. My sense of time felt broken. The trees still leaned away from the pit, like even they didn't want to be too close. I closed my eyes and let the sunlight hit my face. I expected it to feel warm. It wasn't, not the way I remembered. And that's when I understood something I didn't want to understand. I had come back up, but the cold hadn't stayed down there. It had followed me, tucked somewhere under my skin, waiting for the next time someone decided I was worth something. Story 5. When I was around 13, I spent a lot of time on this dress-up chibi game that had a built-in chat room. The game itself was simple. You made a few characters, picked one, and that character became your avatar in the chat. The chat was global, and there were different channels for different topics. You could find a room for almost anything. Because I was an edgy teenager, I joined the horror chat room. It wasn't anything extreme. Mostly people role-playing popular creepypasta characters or making up their own. It was a bunch of kids trying to scare each other and trying to look cool while doing it. Honestly, it was fun. I spent a lot of time there making up little scenes with other people, building stories on the spot. I barely used any of the other channels. If I'm being real, I was a one-room kind of person. After a while, role-playing already existing characters started to feel boring. It felt like wearing someone else's costume. I wanted something new, something that was mine. So I went back to the avatar slots and made my first original character. She wasn't exactly creative. I'm not going to pretend I was some amazing young designer. I gave her white hair and green accessories because green was my favorite color. I added small markings on her face to make her look mysterious. I gave her 2 different eyes, one green and one red, because that was the kind of detail that felt deep when you're 13. It was predictable. It was cringy. But at the time, it felt cool, and more importantly, she was mine. Then I named her Jackie. Even the name was lazy. Jackie wasn't unique or spooky or anything. I knew a woman named Jackie in real life, and in my 13-year-old mind, that was a good enough reason. Not that the real Jackie was creepy or anything. It was just the name I already had in my head. But Jackie became my favorite character to roleplay as almost immediately. It felt different when I spoke as her. I could make up details about her personality on the spot, change direction whenever I wanted, and nobody could tell me I was doing it wrong because she didn't belong to any existing story. I never really gave her a full background, though. I didn't write a clear origin. I didn't decide where she came from, what she wanted, what she was supposed to be. I just kept her vague. At the time, I thought that was freedom, like it made her more flexible, like it let me invent things whenever I felt like it. Now, looking back, I wonder if that was my first mistake, because I played as Jackie for months. Not every day, but often. I built little scraps of a story and kept them going. Other people interacted with her. Some of them were really into it. Some of them acted like she was part of the room, like she was one of the regular characters you'd see. And then one day I got bored. That's the most embarrassing part, honestly. Nothing dramatic happened. No big final story, no goodbye scene. I just decided I wanted to make someone new. So I deleted her. I went back to the character slots, hit delete, and moved on like she had never existed. And that's when things started to go wrong. At first, it was small, easy to explain away. Little glitches, random lag, the app crashing, my phone freezing for a few seconds longer than normal. Sometimes my phone would restart on its own. I blamed storage issues, or a bad update, or maybe malware. I was young, but I knew enough to be worried, so I started checking things. I put my phone in safe mode, tried to see if there were any apps causing problems. I didn't find anything. I took the SIM card out and checked for dust because I'd seen someone do it in a YouTube tutorial once. Again, nothing. I couldn't prove anything was wrong, but the problems kept happening anyway. For a while, I just lived with it. I didn't have another device. I didn't have money to replace it. So I powered through the freezing and the random restarts and the little weird moments where my phone didn't behave the way it should. Ignorance really is bliss, because as long as I treated it like normal tech problems, I could stay calm. Then it got worse in a way that demanded attention. Using my phone started feeling like a fight. Opening apps took forever. Sometimes an app would close and I'd be thrown into a browser window that I hadn't opened. Random tabs would appear, strange websites. Sometimes my phone would freeze so badly it felt dead, and then it would take hours to wake up again. I got scared enough to do a factory reset. I remember sitting there watching the reset screen like it was going to save me. I told myself it had to be a virus, or a hacker, or something I picked up from downloading music or playing old games. A factory reset felt like the ultimate fix. For a little while it worked. My phone ran smoothly again. The random tabs stopped. The freezing eased up. I felt relieved, like I had solved it. Then, once I finally logged back into that chibi dress-up app, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Every character slot was filled with Jackie. Not just one slot. All of them. The same white hair, the green accessories, the face markings, the different colored eyes. Jackie, recreated perfectly, in every space where my other characters should have been. It was like she had multiplied. I stared at it so long my eyes started to hurt. I remember thinking it couldn't be real. It couldn't have happened. The game didn't work like that. I had deleted her. Even if there was some glitch, why would it fill every slot with a deleted character? Then the app reset. Just like that, it snapped back to normal. My actual characters were there again. Jackie was gone. But I had seen it. I tried to tell myself I imagined it. Maybe my eyes were tired. Maybe the reset had scrambled the visuals for a second. Maybe it was a loading bug. That explanation didn't last long, because after that, the sense of being watched started creeping into everything. Not just online, not just when I used that app. I felt it when I texted people. I felt it when I watched videos. I felt it when I lay in bed with my phone in my hand, scrolling at night. It was like something was paying attention. Like whatever I did, it was studying me, waiting for a moment to show itself again. I didn't tell anyone at first because I knew how it would sound. If I told an adult, they'd say it was the internet. If I told my friends, they'd say I was being dramatic. And if I said my deleted character is coming back, I'd sound like I was losing it. But the weird stuff kept stacking up. I started writing some of it down just to make sure I wasn't making it up after the fact. How often my phone restarted. What time it happened. Which apps were open. What websites appeared. I wanted proof. I wanted a pattern. Eventually, I hit a point where I couldn't carry it alone anymore. One night after school, I called my best friend. I'll call him Jabel, because that's the name he insisted I use when I told this story. Jabel was good with technology. Not like a professional, but he was the kid who knew how to fix things. He was always the one helping people with settings and resets and basic troubleshooting. So I told him everything. The glitches, the freezing, the random tabs, the restarts, and then Jackie, how I deleted her, and how she showed up in every slot afterward. He listened, and he didn't laugh. He didn't mock me. He just did what he always did, which was try to explain it in a way that kept me calm. He said it was probably a virus, something I picked up from downloading music or playing old flash games. He said phones do weird stuff sometimes, especially older ones. He told me Jackie wasn't real. She wasn't tracking me. She wasn't listening to my conversations. She couldn't be. I remember feeling embarrassed, but also relieved, because hearing someone else say it out loud helped. It made me feel like I was just being paranoid, like I had gotten too deep into horror roleplay and it was messing with my head. Right after he said it, the call cut off. At first I thought he hung up on me, which would have been rude. I remember being annoyed and thinking, seriously? About an hour later, he called back. He sounded unsettled. He said his phone had completely shut off after we disconnected, and it took a long time to boot back up. He joked about it at first, but his voice didn't sound like a joke. While we were talking about what happened, we heard something on the line. Feedback. Not normal static. Something thicker, like the sound was layered, like someone had opened another audio track underneath our conversation. Then we heard a woman's voice, low, buried in that hum, hard to understand. We couldn't make out the words, but we could hear the shape of speech, and the way it sounded made my skin go cold, because it didn't feel random. It didn't feel like a radio signal crossing lines. It felt like it was there with us. We both went quiet at the same time, just listening. The voice kept going, and even though we couldn't understand it, it felt like it was mocking us, like it was responding to the fact that we were talking about Jackie, like it was amused by us trying to explain it away. Jabel whispered my name like he didn't want the voice to hear him. We agreed to hang up and power off our devices for the rest of the night. No more calls, no more texting, no more messing around. We were both trying to be brave, but I could hear the fear in him too, which made it worse. The next day at school, I let him look at my phone. We sat together and he checked settings, looked through apps, tried to see if there was anything obviously wrong. He suggested another reset, so we did it. Again, when you power a phone on, it usually makes that little startup sound, and sometimes it says the brand name out loud. That's what mine was supposed to do. It powered on, and a woman's voice spoke. But instead of the brand name, we heard laughter, not a cute laugh, not a normal laugh, something low and satisfied, like someone had been waiting for that exact moment. Then the phone shut off, and it never turned back on again. Not a dead battery kind of shut off, not a frozen screen. It bricked itself. Like something inside it decided it was done pretending. I still have that phone. It's in a drawer at my place. I've never thrown it out because a part of me is scared to. And I've never taken it to be fixed because, honestly, I don't want to know what they'd find. I don't want someone to plug it in, get it to boot up, and bring whatever that was back into the world. Sometimes I see it sitting on my dresser when I'm cleaning my room, covered in a thin layer of dust, like it's just an old piece of junk I never dealt with. And I still get that thought. What if it's waiting? What if it's not broken the way phones break? What if it's quiet on purpose? I keep telling myself it's nothing, that it was just a messed up phone and a scary coincidence and my teenage brain turning glitches into a ghost story, that it's over, that it ended years ago. But every so often, late at night, I'll glance at the drawer where I keep it, and I'll swear I can feel the same thing I felt back then, that attention. Like something is still there, not moving, not making noise, just aware. And the worst part is how small it all started, how normal it seemed at first. Like the whole thing began because I created a character with no real story, gave her a name that didn't mean much, and then deleted her like she didn't matter. Like that was enough to make her angry. Jabel isn't his real name, by the way. He made me promise I'd use an alias if I ever told anyone. Back then, we both laughed about that. Now I understand why he didn't want his real name anywhere near it. Story 6. Someone 20 years ago would be amazed and horrified by what we can order from our phones now. The fact that you can have groceries, furniture, medicine, sex toys, and a box of random surprises delivered to your doorstep without speaking to another human being would sound like magic to them. Last week, I was browsing a site that sells different styles of potatoes you can send anonymously with a message attached. And at the exact same time, my monthly pleasure box and my DoorDash order were dropped off together. Awkward timing, but honestly, it also felt like a perfect picture of my life. There are hidden gems all over the internet. You can have almost anything shipped to you, dropped on your porch, and pulled inside with one greedy arm when you crack the door like a hermit crab. No small talk, no eye contact, no standing in line. 8 days ago, I was one of those people who felt blessed by that system. I could sit on my couch, order whatever I wanted, and have someone else bring it to me. And I was always hungry. Not I could eat hungry. Hungry like my body kept resetting. Hungry like I could eat 5 to 7 small meals a day and still find myself searching the pantry again. It wasn't even always cravings. It was more like my stomach didn't believe I had eaten. I would finish a meal, feel satisfied for a short time, and then that emptiness would return like a timer going off. Sure, I bought things I didn't need, but that was part of the job, because I used to be an online reviewer. #Rachel's Reviews. That's what I called it. I had a blog and I tested delivery services, subscription boxes, weird products, life hacks, health stuff, and any other nonsense that companies convince people they can't live without. I sampled the fancy services and the sketchy ones, the well-known brands and the bottom-of-the-barrel mystery boxes. All for you ungrateful strangers. I'm kidding. Kind of. But I am serious about this. I'm done. This is my last review. Not because I'm quitting the internet, but because I'm not sure I'll get the chance to write another one, and because the police won't issue a public warning. I tried. They brushed it off. So if anyone is going to say something publicly, it has to be me. There's a doctor out there. His name doesn't matter, because people like this always change names. They move. They shut down clinics and reopen them as wellness centers with fresh paint and a new website. But if you ever see him, you'll know. He's a bariatric surgeon with a half-star rating on ZocDoc from 3 reviews. One of those reviews is mine. The other 2, I can only assume, are from people who booked treatment and managed to leave. Because I'm convinced that most people who went there didn't. Not long-term. Not in a way that ended with them walking back into the real world. To be clear, I did my homework first. I went to the highest-rated doctor near me, too, because I wanted to compare. That visit was normal, professional, boring. They asked me questions, weighed me, explained risks, recommended diet changes and exercise like that's what anyone wants to hear. Their consultant asked, "Have you ever had bariatric surgery before?" And I lied, because if I admitted yes, I would get disqualified from certain treatments. Also, the last surgery I had didn't make me less hungry. If anything, it made me digest faster and get hungry sooner. The idea was supposed to be that a shorter digestive tract would reduce intake. For me, it felt like it just sped everything up. I was always back to empty. The good doctor told me to lose weight naturally, which is doctor speak for go suffer in private for a year and then come back. Meanwhile, I can literally get injectable weight loss medication delivered to my mailbox every week. The world has changed. Doctors are still catching up. Anyway, that visit wasn't really about my health. It was about my job. I got a consultation, left my notes, and wrote a review. Then someone on my blog, a commenter who thought he was being helpful, told me there was no way I could be impartial unless I also reviewed the low-rated doctors. The other side of the spectrum, he called it, like it was a restaurant review. Fine. I take my job seriously. I decided to do it. We'll call the low-rated doctor Barry the bariatric surgeon. I'm pretty sure he's not in North Carolina anymore. If he's smart, he's long gone. If he's not smart, then he's still out there with another building and another receptionist and another fake smile. This is what happened. The place was in a business park. the kind with identical buildings and sad landscaping. From the outside, it didn't look like a medical center. No large sign, no proud branding, just the neat entrance and tinted windows. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you could drive right past it. Inside, it looked expensive in a cold way. Cool blue and gray everywhere. Tile and concrete and painted walls designed to feel calming. Posters of thinner people smiling at you like they were proud of being less. At the front counter sat the receptionist. She couldn't have been older than 20. Perky. Perfect skin. Annoyingly pretty in that way where they looked like they were manufactured. Her face was polished and symmetrical, like the kind of face you see in an ad, and even under fluorescent lighting, she looked flawless. No shine, no sweat, no real human texture. I hated her immediately, which I know makes me sound awful, but I'm being honest. "Welcome to Barry's Bariatrics," she said in a voice that was too sweet, too practiced. I told her I had an appointment. She clicked her nails across the keyboard, long manicured nails that made little tapping sounds like insects. She found my name and frowned, somehow managing to look even more innocent. Big eyes, soft mouth. Instagram face. That's what people call it. "Oh dear," she said, turning the computer screen around to show me what I already knew. "It seems like you only booked a consultation." "Yes," I said, careful. "That's what I booked. But we don't do consultations without at least a stay in the facility," she said. "We need to see your baseline. It's really the only way." I tried to explain that the online system had let me book a consultation. I told her I didn't bring an overnight bag. I didn't bring my sleep apnea mask. I wasn't prepared to stay anywhere. I was just here to do the appointment and leave. Then she said something that went against everything I believe in. Sometimes the online system can make a mistake. I actually think I gasped. I'm not exaggerating. My brain locked up on that sentence because I have lived my life trusting the system. The system is supposed to be the thing that doesn't make mistakes. That's the whole point. The system is what you rely on, so you don't have to rely on people. I was ready to turn around and walk out. Then she said the words that got me. "The first day at the facility is free. Free. Complimentary robe, room service, TV, a spa, a treatment center." She described it like a little vacation, a home away from home. She smiled like I'd be silly not to accept. I should have left anyway. But I didn't. "Cell phones aren't allowed in the spa," she added, as if it was a minor inconvenience. That almost stopped me. Almost. But she showed me a personal cubby with a lock and key, a place to store my belongings. She acted like it was for my comfort, like it was a luxury. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I could handle one night without my phone. I told myself this would just be another strange review and I'd go home in the morning with a funny story. She guided me on a tour. There was a large indoor pool directly off the main entrance, multiple saunas, a gym I wasn't going to use, a snack bar I absolutely planned on using, full kitchen staff, medical bays, a surgery center. Everything was pristine. Everything was calm. Everything was designed to look like healing. The building didn't seem that big from the outside, and it stood alone at the end of the business park. I assumed there might be a basement level for storage or mechanical stuff. Maybe two. I did not expect anything else. Nobody expects what I found later. Nobody. After the tour, there were three things that bothered me, even before anything truly bad happened. First, the review score. It was sitting at something like 0.75 stars, yet their wall sign bragged they'd been owned and operated since 1666. That doesn't even make sense. No weight loss clinic in North Carolina has been operating since 1666. It was either a joke or a lie, or something meant to make you feel small. Second, my private room. It wasn't cozy. It wasn't even medical in a normal way. It felt like a concrete box, bare walls, no art, no couch, no real furniture. Just a huge bed in the middle of the room, a tiny TV on a stand like a computer monitor, and a telephone on a small table within arm's reach of the bed. And when I say huge bed, I mean huge. Bigger than any bed I'd ever seen in a hospital or hotel. It made me think they had seen patients much larger than me. Patients big enough that a normal bed wouldn't work. Third, Barry. He showed up for what he called new patient rounds. He opened my door without knocking and stood close to the doorway, leaving it cracked behind him as if he wanted a clear exit. The first words out of his mouth were, "My, you must have been a lazy little toad, eh?" He said it with a smile. Perfect teeth. Too perfect. They looked ageless, shiny against his wrinkled face. His eyes were tight. He had black stubble. He didn't look old exactly, but he didn't look like a normal age either. Like time had done some things to his skin, but skipped others. In any other situation, I would have ended it right there and left a review that night. But he said it so fast, with such a casual tone, that I barely managed to say, "Excuse me?" before he was wrapping a measuring tape around my waist. For the robes, of course, he said easily, and our starting weight comparison. He measured like I was an object, like I was a package. "And what is your goal weight?" he asked. I threw out a ridiculous number, the kind people say when they're joking but also kind of hoping. He nodded. No surprise, no hesitation, not even a flicker of doubt. "It'll take a few days," he said, "but I think we can get there." A few days. He said it like he was talking about drying your hair, not losing a massive amount of weight. Then he left, and I sat there replaying his words. In my head, I went through the options. He was either a con artist, a liar, or a butcher. There was no other category that fit. Still, I was intrigued, skeptical, but curious. Curiosity is one of my worst traits, especially when it comes with free services and the promise of something exclusive. I planned on hitting the pool, maybe the sauna, but when I sat on the bed, my body sank into it like it was swallowing me. The sheets were insanely soft, the kind of softness that feels expensive and wrong. The bed held me in all the right places. It felt like being wrapped in something heavy and safe. I didn't want to move, and because the telephone sat right next to me, I didn't have to. I picked it up. "Hi, Rachel. What can I get for you?" the receptionist said. Of course, it was her voice again, bright and sweet. "I don't have a menu," I said, trying to ask about food without sounding like I was hungry an hour after checking into a bariatric facility. "We don't have a menu," she replied. "We can make whatever you'd like." That sounded like a lie. No weight loss center lets patients order whatever they want. But she said, "Dr. Barry doesn't believe in dieting. He encourages residents to go nuts as long as all dinners are done by 7 p.m. sharp. That's how confident he is in the program." I remember thinking, okay, so this is a scam, a fetish place, a serial killer with a medical license. Something, because nothing about this sounded normal. I decided to push it and have fun before they sent me the inevitable salad. "I'll have a bacon cheeseburger," I said, spaghetti bolognese, and a Slurpee, half Coke, half blue. I expected her to argue. I expected her to correct me. She didn't. "Sure thing," she said, and hung up. Then I turned on the TV and discovered there was only one channel. One. It played a grainy documentary that looked like it had been filmed decades ago. An indigenous guide leading a videographer and an Asian scientist across a bridge. No clear narration. No normal background music. Just this low chant like song on repeat. A rumble that didn't stop. None of them seemed to speak the same language, because they communicated mostly through pointing and gestures. The scientist wrote in a notebook at strange moments. It was the weirdest thing I'd seen in a long time, and I've seen a lot of weird things online. A bell dinged at my door. It slid open, and the receptionist stepped in, pushing a cart overloaded with food. She placed everything beside me on the bed. It felt like only minutes had passed since I ordered. The food looked good, too good, but the room filled with a sickly meat smell, like the liquid that leaks out of packaged chicken in the grocery store. Not cooked meat, not food smell. Raw, heavy, faintly rotten. Before I could say anything, she placed a small white cup on the bed with pills inside. Daily medication for the program, she said cheerfully. And then she left. The smell left with her and the cart, like she carried it away in her wake. I stared at the pills. No chance. I wasn't taking random medication in a place that didn't even let me keep my phone. I told myself I'd be here one night. Eat, sleep, leave, write the review. So I ate. I'm not proud of how fast I ate, but this story isn't about my appetite. It's about what they did with it. After I finished the burger, the phone rang. A man's voice came through. Deep, smooth, friendly. Hey? Hi? I said, thrown off. What are you wearing? He asked, and I nearly slammed the receiver down until he laughed. I'm kidding, he said. We're all in robes. My name's Dominic. I think I'm your next-door neighbor. I made a joke about his name. He laughed. He told me there were only 3 residents there that week. Him, Shelley, and Jay. He warned me Jay was kind of a bitch, but in a joking way. He told me I could call him or Shelley if I got bored. It was the first moment in that building where I felt like there was another real person nearby. He mentioned he had shoved his bed up against the wall because sleeping in the middle of the room freaked him out. I started to ask him how long he'd been there. Then the line went dead. So did the lights. The TV went black and white text appeared on the screen. Lights out. 7:30 p.m. I actually said, "Oh, come on," out loud. Who sleeps at 7:30? Then my head got heavy, like my brain was being pushed downward. I remember thinking, fine, I ate too much, I'm in a food coma. I'll close my eyes for a minute. That minute became the whole night. The next morning, I woke to the bell dinging again and the door opening. The receptionist rolled in another cart and dropped off 4 plates. The smell hit first, that same wrong meat smell, but the food itself looked like breakfast heaven. Confetti pancakes, hard-boiled eggs, a cinnamon swirl bagel, a giant cinnamon bun dripping icing down the side. I didn't order breakfast. I croaked. This is Brenner. She chirped and left, sliding the door shut. The smell disappeared again once she was gone. I tried to sit up, and pain stung through my thighs. Sharp at first, then a tingling numbness. I panicked instantly, the kind of panic that makes you think the worst possible thing before you even have proof. I ripped the sheet away and looked. My skin looked wrong. It lay flatter against the bed in some places and sagged in others like something had been pulled away underneath, like liposuction after the swelling goes down, except it had happened in one night. My thighs looked looser. My stomach looked softer in a way that didn't match how I had gone to sleep. And my legs didn't feel right. I tried to stand. I hit the floor. My legs didn't work. They just collapsed, like the signal between my brain and my body had been cut. I tried to crawl. My arms weren't strong enough. I tried to roll, push, drag myself across the concrete, but even though I felt lighter, I barely moved. I reached for the phone and knocked it off the table with a clatter, hoping someone would hear and come help. Nobody came. I grabbed the receiver with shaking hands and called the front desk. It rang and rang and rang. No answer. Then, desperate, I dialed 4. Dom answered immediately. "You never told me your name," he said in a low, teasing voice. "What the hell is this place?" I snapped. He started to say the name of the facility, like that answered anything. "Don't mess with me," I said. "Are you in on this? Is this some trafficking thing? I swear I will expose all of you." "No," he said, and he sounded genuinely confused. "I don't think so. What's happening?" I told him my legs were useless. I asked what time it was. He tried to calm me down and said Jay had gone through something like that. He put Jay on the line. Jay's voice was younger and sharper. "You skipped the meds too, didn't you?" he said. "Dummy." Dom laughed and called him a bitch again. But Jay didn't sound like he was joking. Jay told me he'd skipped the pills once and couldn't move the left side of his body for 2 days. I stared at the little cups with pills on my tray like they were watching me back. I refused. I wasn't taking them. I wasn't eating either. I decided I'd starve myself if I had to, stay awake all night if I had to, and when my legs came back, I'd get out and call the cops. Then I looked at the small window high on the wall and realized the sun was setting. My stomach sank. I had been there longer than I thought. Time felt wrong in that room, like it slipped. I turned on the TV again out of pure desperation, like the sound might keep me awake, might keep me anchored. The documentary played again. The same chant, the same bridge, the same silent people. Then the lights went out automatically. The screen went black. Lights out, 7:30 p.m. Tonight, I told myself, I will stay awake. I positioned myself to watch the door. I held the heavy phone in my hands like a weapon. I planned it out. If someone came in, I'd pretend to be asleep, then swing. I'd do anything. I'd fight. I'd scream until someone in the building heard me. I would not let them do whatever they had done the night before. But my stomach was screaming too. Real screaming, deep and hollow, like it was eating itself. Hunger so strong, it made me nauseated. My body felt weak. My eyelids got heavy again, heavier than they had any right to be. Then the screaming started. At first, I thought it was my mind slipping, like a dream sound bleeding through. Then it happened again, loud enough to snap me awake. A woman screaming somewhere in the facility. Not a startled shout. Not a cry. A long, full scream like pure terror, like something you don't make unless you think you're about to die. I pressed my ear to the wall as best I could. The sound bounced around, hard to place, but it was close enough to make my skin crawl. Then it stopped. Later it started again, closer, and this time it was a man, Dom. I knew it was him because of the voice, the deep tone, the way he carried sound. He screamed for what felt like an hour. His voice went hoarse, but the screaming kept happening anyway, like it had passed beyond pain and into panic. I heard pounding too, frantic knocks against the wall like he was begging to be heard. I held my breath and didn't make a sound back. After Dom, I heard another man screaming. That had to be Jay. It was further away, and it didn't last as long. No one came into my room that night. No keycard swipe. No footsteps at my door. No Barry. No receptionist. Nothing. Morning came slowly. The window brightened. Shadows shifted. The bed's shadow on the wall shrank as the sun rose. I made it through the night. I turned the TV back on, and the documentary started again from what looked like the beginning. My hands shook as I dialed Dom again and again. No answer. I tried Jay. No answer. I tried Shelley. No answer. I tried the front desk with the last bit of hope I had left, expecting it to ring forever. On the third ring, the receptionist answered. Her voice was sweet as ever, like I was calling to ask for extra towels. "What the hell is this place?" I said. "Whatever do you mean?" she replied. I was awake, I told her. I know what goes on here. I want out. I don't care what you do to anyone else. Just let me out. I won't tell the cops. That was a lie. Of course it was a lie. I intended to burn them down online, if nothing else. There was a pause on the line. Then she asked, "Are you going to eat your food?" My stomach dropped. I turned my head slowly and looked at the bed. The plates from last night were still there, and somehow I knew they hadn't just been left there. I knew she was asking because she already knew the answer, like she could see me. I slammed the phone down so hard the receiver bounced. A second later, it rang, then rang again. Then I heard banging on the wall to my left, and the phone shook on the table like the wall itself was vibrating. "Dom?" I sobbed, grabbing the receiver. "Wassop?" he said, cheerful, like nothing had happened. His voice was slightly gruff, but otherwise normal. "You want to hit the gym later?" Just kidding, I couldn't process it. "Are you alive? Are you okay?" He said yes, he was fine. Then he asked what I was talking about. I told him I heard him screaming all night. The pounding against the walls. The panic. He laughed. "That sounds like a crazy nightmare." But I hadn't been asleep. I knew I hadn't. Dom suggested maybe I was having a reaction to the meds I hadn't taken. The pills stared at me from their little cups. Then my door opened. Barry walked in. I grabbed the pillow and tried to throw it at him, tried to curse him out, tried to do anything that felt like control. He didn't react. He didn't even blink hard. "Please hang up the phone," he said calmly. I didn't. Not for a while. I stared at him while he stared back with eyes that looked glazed, like he wasn't even really looking at me. More like he was looking through me. Dom's voice on the line didn't help. He sounded oblivious. Eventually, I hung up. Barry smiled like a teacher praising a child. "Thanks." He walked over and turned the TV on again. The same documentary. The same chant. "Hungry, my little toad?" he asked. I wanted to spit in his face. I wanted to throw the phone again, but I couldn't even stand. He leaned against the TV stand like he owned the room. "If you want to get out," he said, "get up and hit me with that phone. Bash my head in. Then run out of here. No one will stop you." I just stared at him. He tilted his head. "No? If you won't do it for yourself, let me assure you no one else will do it for you." I threw the phone anyway. It hit the wall and fell uselessly, and my arm ached like I'd lifted something heavy. Barry didn't move. "Now eat," he said. His voice was flat, certain, like he had said those words to hundreds of people, and they always ended the same way. I realized then that nothing I did would surprise him. I wasn't the first stubborn patient. I wasn't the first one to refuse pills. I wasn't the first to threaten police. And I wouldn't be the first to die in that room either. So I ate. I ate like an animal. I shoved eggs down, tore pancakes apart with my hands, swallowed without tasting, trying to feel the screaming hole in me because it felt like hunger was the only thing my body could still obey. Syrup and grease and sugar dripped from my chin. For a few seconds, my brain tried to pretend I was at home, eating some greasy diner breakfast that had been delivered, safe and warm. Then I tasted it. The rot underneath. The smell that had been hidden by heat and sugar and sauce. Dead meat. Spoiled meat. Something that had sat out too long and then been disguised. The taste hit the back of my throat like sewage. I gagged. I tried to vomit. My body refused. It clung to the food like it was desperate for any nutrients, even rotten ones. I dry heaved until my stomach hurt, and Barry just watched with his arms folded, smiling slightly, like he was watching a nature documentary. On the TV, the documentary looped toward its end. The guide stayed back while the videographer and the scientist crossed a bridge. They looked over an overhang at a whirlpool below. White spray hissed up. The Asian scientist was hit by a burst of white that sizzled against her skin. Then she was gone. The camera panned down to the whirlpool, spinning and spinning, and my vision started to haze at the edges. Dizziness rolled over me. I tried to blink it away. My eyelids felt too heavy. Then I heard a slurping sound, like a straw at the bottom of a soda cup, sucking air and ice. And the sound was coming from me. Pressure built in my stomach, centered around my belly button, a horrible pulling feeling. When I forced my head down, I saw something protruding from a fold of my stomach. A tube, not plastic, not medical tubing. Something clear and wet and alive-looking, thick as a vacuum hose. I watched pink chunks of tissue travel through it in slow, wet pulses like cotton candy being twisted inside. I screamed. I grabbed it at the base and pulled with everything I had. My hand slipped on slickness. It was hard on the outside, but it gave under pressure like muscle. It came loose with a wet pop. Slop spilled onto my stomach. The suction noise stopped and was replaced by a high-pitched whine like an injured animal. That's when I understood the tube wasn't a tool. It was a creature. It jerked away from me, slithering down off the bed like a hose being reeled back. It slid toward the door, and I saw it squeeze through a small crack like it didn't need much space at all. A wet, foul trail remained behind it on the concrete. The door was open. Unlocked. Air from outside the room moved across my face like a promise. I didn't know where the strength came from, but I started crawling. I was lighter. Skin hung loose from my stomach and arms. My legs were still numb, but feeling was creeping back in sharp pins and needles. I crawled hand over hand for what felt like forever, nails scraping concrete, knees burning, until my hand hit the doorframe. I grabbed the knob, hauled myself up, and stumbled into the hallway. The lobby was empty, quiet in a way that made my ears ring. Through the glass doors, I could see the night sky. Clouds, a faint moon. Two locked doors stood between me and outside, both bolted like they expected something to try to get out. I grabbed the welcome desk and crashed into it, sweeping the receptionist's neat little items to the floor. I didn't care. The food cart sat nearby, and I leaned on it like a walker. It held my weight. I pushed it forward, inching toward the exit. Then I heard a scream from deeper inside the building. Dom again. The sound was coming from the dark spa area, the pool, the saunas, the massage rooms, all those calming blue-gray spaces that now felt like a slaughterhouse. Barry's voice came back to me. If you want to be saved, do it yourself. So why did I turn the cart and follow the screaming? I don't have a clean answer. Maybe guilt. Maybe panic. Maybe the simple fact that I couldn't leave knowing someone else was still inside that place, begging for help. Maybe I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining everything. That Dom existed. That I hadn't just gone insane alone in a concrete box. I pushed the cart through the dark. The massage tables looked like bodies under sheets. Shadows moved when I didn't want them to. I followed the sound to another wooden door, cracked open. Something wet and soft held it propped. I hit it with the cart, and the wheel jolted. I fell forward, catching myself on something spongy, warm, and goopy. It felt like the inside of a body. I looked down. A huge living tube ran across the floor like a breathing hose, disappearing into Dom's room and trailing back into the darkness of the spa. It pulsed faintly under my hand, and when I pressed on it, it reacted, like it hated being touched. Beautiful, isn't it? A cheerful voice said behind me. The receptionist. Her voice, sweet and excited. She flicked on an overhead light. Inside Dom's room, I saw him on the bed, comatose, eyes closed, mouth open in a silent scream. The tube was inserted into his stomach, and it was sucking, pulling him down from the inside. The sound was everywhere. wet and hungry. I didn't think. I climbed onto the tube and smashed down on it with my weight, again and again, trying to stop the flow. A bulge formed in front of me as the tube backed up, swelling, becoming almost transparent as it filled with pink tissue and liquid. The tube tried to retract from Dom, but it was too late. The bulge inflated like a balloon pushed past its limit. Then it burst. Warm liquid and chunks sprayed across the room, on my face, in my mouth, on the walls. The smell was unbearable. The receptionist screamed, finally dropping the sweet voice. The tube recoiled, pulling itself back into the darkness. I crawled to Dom, shaking, trying to wake him. He opened his eyes, barely. His face looked thinner, older, like whatever was draining him was draining time too. There was a fresh hole in his stomach where the tube had been, blood seeping out. I realized with sick clarity that I might have killed him, trying to help. "Hey," he whispered, trying to smile. "Room 2?" The warmth in his voice flickered for a second, and it broke me. Tears came fast. I wanted to tell him I was sorry. I wanted to carry him out. I wanted to save him. Then there was a sound from the spa, low and deep, like something massive moving in the dark.